Hello, mathematicians. Today we are going to focus on graphing and data. Our objective is to look at a bar graph and interpret the information from that bar graph. Also, being able to know the different parts of graphs so that we're familiar with them. Graphs are super important. They help us organize information and data so that we can easily understand and interpret what it is they're displaying. So if you notice here, you might be able to display data on number of trees in the park. You might be able to display data on different kinds of things in something. So these are all different kinds of graphs you may or may not have seen before. And we're going to see which ones are which. Some of them are a little bit more obvious than others. But let's see if we look at our word bank here. Stem and leaf, bar graph, horizontal bar graph, pie graph, a pictograph, line plot graph, coordinate plane graph, and a line graph. As I'm looking at these pictures, I've definitely seen some of these before. And I'm going to kind of use process of elimination for ones that I have seen. And some of our clues are actually in the graph name. Right away, I see stem and leaf. This one's I'm not as familiar. You may not be as familiar with this one, but we can assume that this is the stem and leaf plot. Next, I want to think about a bar graph, but I'm noticing that I have two bars here. I also notice I have a horizontal bar graph. Well, because I have a horizontal goes this way from side to side, but this must be my horizontal bar graph. And then this one must just be my regular bar graph. When I think of a pie graph, well, we also might have this might also be called a circle graph. We are going to think about that. It's shaped like a pie. Pictograph. I'm going to come back to that one. I definitely know line plot graph because we have done some work with these before. That's going to be my one with the X's here. Then I have a line graph and coordinate plane graph. Well, my line graph is going to, I've seen these before. That's going to be where I have my data kind of plotted out in lines. And then I have a pictograph and coordinate plane. Well, this one, where we have two numbers that meet and then the dot meets in the middle of those, that's going to be my coordinate plane. And, oops, my pictograph, if I have some pictures or symbols, that was kind of my clue for my pictograph here. So we're not going to go through all of these today. We're going to really focus on interpreting bar graphs since we've done line plots before. But also I just wanted you to be a little bit familiar with the different kinds of graphs you might see or you've seen already. So as we scroll through, we want to think about what are the different parts of a graph? What do graphs need? Well, we know that we need a title because the title tells us what it is our graphs are displaying. Notice here on our very first one, numbers of trees in the park. If that didn't have that, we'd be a little confused as to what are these bars representing. We need to make sure that we know that there's an x-axis label, a y-axis label, which is the vertical line, which is going to look, we're going to kind of come across that here. So I have right here is my x-axis, okay, whoops, x-axis, and it is labeled with the game. And my y-axis is this one that goes up and down, that's vertical. A way that I remember that is because the y kind of goes down like it would vertically. So the y-axis is going to give us some other information as well. So it's important to know what these information pieces are containing. Then we have our, some graphs will need a key to clarify the symbols used. We might see that for a pictograph. How much does each of those symbols represent? So what we're going to look at today, we're going to practice getting familiar and comfortable with some of these words. You may have seen some of them before. And then you're going to actually get a chance to make a bar graph based on some data, which we'll go through together. So we need to make sure we have our maximum, knowing that that's the largest number in a set of data. The minimum is the smallest. So we've done that, the maximum, minimum, when we looked at line plot graphs. The range is the difference between the minimum and maximum, which means we have to subtract those two numbers. The mode is the number that occurs most often. I remember that because mode has MO in it, and most often is MO. So that helps me remember that that's what it means when I see that. The median is the middle number in a set of data, and it must arrange from the smallest to largest. And this should be data here. And we'll go through on how to find that. The median is that middle number. And then we have the mean or average. This is, you will see these terms used in both ways. So when we find the average or the mean, we have to add up all the numbers and divide it by how many numbers there are. So let's practice taking a look at analyzing some of this data in this graph here. I know that this is measuring the basketball points scored by Joe. I know on my x-axis, I have the game number. So we have game 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And actually, this should be labeled on this side with points because I know that's what we're measuring. So my y-axis should have points off to the side. Well, when I look at this, I can see my intervals and whenever a number or a bar goes in between, I can see that it's going to be your odd numbers. So my maximum here, I can easily tell, which is very visual, that in the fifth game, Joe scored the most points, which was 17. If you want to pause the video and see if you are able to find the minimum and the range. Remember how we can find our range here. So the minimum is going to be my number here in the red, and it goes up to 6. So when I find my range, I have to remember I need to subtract my numbers. So 17 minus 6 gets me 11. So my range is 11 points. Now the mode is the number that occurs most often. And if I look here at my data, I don't have any numbers that repeat. For instance, he didn't score the same amount of points in game 1 than he did in game 5, or game 2 as he did in game 4, and so on. So my mode for this set of data is going to be none. The median, so what we need to do is we need to make sure, I'm going to go back to my note here, it's the middle number. You have to arrange your numbers from smallest to largest. So I'm going to go here, and I know my smallest number was 6. I'm going to read my next one, game 2 was his next smallest. He had 10 points. Then game 4, he had 12 points. Then in game 3, he had 15. And then lastly, 17. So when we do find our median, we have to figure out which number is the middle. So I have to go through and cross off, starting with my smallest and my largest. Then I go to the next smallest, next largest, and what's left in the middle is my 12. So my median number is 12. What I would need to do to find the mean or average, this is where I'm going to need your help. You're going to need to make sure that you add up all the numbers and then divide it by how many numbers there are. So I'm going to need to take some time. So pause the video. Let's set up our numbers. and see if you can figure out how much this would equal when you add them all up. And there's 5 numbers that we're using here, so that'll be the number we divide it by. So when we add these all up, we happen to get 60, which is a nice number, and we have 5 numbers, so what I would need to do is figure out what 60 divided by 5 would be. And since we're all excellent divisors now, we should be able to figure out what this is, and we get an average of 12. So these are great words and terminology to know, and great numbers to kind of analyze and interpret our data in a graph. What you're going to be doing on Seesaw to practice your bar graphing skills is you're going to get a page that looks just like this. And what you're going to need to do, we'll do the first one together. Since it is a little tricky, the visual piece is a little different. So I'm going to have my little highlighter tool here. And this is where I really want you to use your skills of, did I look at my title of my graph? Did I look at my x-axis? Did I look at my y-axis? To make sure I understand what it is we're graphing. So I have my date in January in my table up here, and number of quarters collected. I'm going to look here. The title of my graph says number of dollars collected in January. Interesting. I have quarters and dollars. So that's definitely going to affect the way I display my data here. I have the date down here in January, so I know that's going to match with this. Okay. I got my 4, 8, 12, and so on. But then if I notice here, I have the number of quarters on my y-axis, the number of dollars collected. Well, if I have 16 quarters, I'm going to have to do some math. I'm going to have to figure out how many quarters are going to be in and make those dollars. Well, I know 4 quarters equals $1, so I'm going to need to divide my 16 by 4. And when I do that, I get $4. So on my graph, I'm going to need to shade up to the number 4 as neatly as I can. And so what I want you to notice is that this was a little wider than I wanted, but you are going to leave this little middle part open here. Whoops, it erased my whole thing. And we'll just shade that in really quickly again, and it just goes up to 4. You're going to want to leave that and make sure you shade it in nice and neat. What you need to do is figure out the rest of these and what you would divide each of these by to fill in the rest of the data for your graph. All right, mathematicians, we look forward to seeing your graphs. Thank you.